Hey, tech writing students, Professor Norman here with another check-in for you. Hope everybody's doing okay this week as we're in week 10. And, as I'm recording now, it's a kind of a dreary day outside. Um, no, it's good to get the rain, like old people say. Let's not talk about rain. Let's talk about something cool and hip like data. That's really the theme of this week, is to play around with some pretty easy to obtain data. And as far as the data memo project goes, that's one of those that I think it's pretty straightforward once you kind of recognize what it's going for. But it's also one that I've kind of mentioned this, and you can probably tell it's one of those ones that I would have kind of like guided through everybody through in the class a little bit more. So it's one of those ones that me just dumping the materials on Blackboard could leave some kind of confused thoughts or some gaps that might need to be addressed. So I thought it might be helpful just to talk about that project and what I'm going for with that just a little bit more. The basic idea with data is that it can be very revealing in a way that surpasses our gut instincts and our kind of like individual observations, right? Stats and data derived from like counting and measuring things is just so much more convincing and compelling and revealing, illuminating than just kind of going by our gut. And that's been true for me as a teacher. You can kind of get a sense of like how a class is doing, and it's like, okay, well, I mean, I guess everybody's kind of doing all right. And then when you actually see all the grades together, that tells me something didn't go right. Whether it was with me or whether it's due to other circumstances, like the world. That is up to interpretation. But the data itself helps to reveal that something is not quite right. And so this very simple project this week is supposed to kind of like, hopefully give you the opportunity by, being silly, playing around a little bit, just to find one of those moments where you're like, that's interesting. I would not have thought that to be the case. So both data memos are kind of the same thing, but it's like it's like a transformation task. So data memo 1 is kind of like more like your very basic, simple, straightforward, fully written, all textually based reporting of some data for this silly, dumb, hypothetical scenario about Big Court and all of their widgets that they're making, the very realistic sounding widgets. And you've got your boss who's Jim Bob Big Boy, and he basically wants you to tell him where to put this new factory. And just the simplest way to do that is to go get some data from a very reputable source, the census. And so you've probably seen this, you've probably been playing around with this a little bit, but you've got the link to the census website, and all you have to do there is just kind of go into their little search bar and just put in information for different locations, and you just have to find 2 locations to compare against each other on the categories of veteran population, because they want to target veterans for their employees, their workers that are going to work in the factory. They just want, the good PR of having a lot of veterans there, regardless of what their training might be, whatever. So there's that, and then based on the statistic of whether or not they have a high percentage of households that have computers in them, because I guess it takes a certain amount of like computer skill. Just go with it on this. And so you just kind of find that information for 2 different locations, 2 different cities, and you just kind of compare that and report that back to Jim Bob. Pretty easy task. I will say, and you're probably seeing this on the screen right now, when I did this for the 2 places that I've lived for the majority of my life, Vincennes, Indiana, and then Salisbury, Maryland, I was actually pretty surprised. I think of Vincennes as being kind of a podunk type of town, but actually had a higher percentage of people who own a computer in or households that own a computer than Salisbury. And not that Salisbury is any great intellectual, technologically advanced center, but it's a much bigger city too. Almost twice the size of Vincennes. So I just kind of thought, and that's what we're going for. We're just kind of by looking at the data, sometimes it'll reveal something, and you'll be like, oh, that's a lot closer than I thought it would be, or that's a lot more different, or it kind of swings in a way. So that can be helpful, and I hope that kind of makes sense, because that's all we want to do is just kind of get a feel for like what data offers. The other part of that then is with data memo 2, it's a bit of a transformation task, because as useful as it is to just kind of like put facts and stats and things like that into a paper, or a memo in this case, what can be even more revealing and illuminating is seeing it in some sort of visual way. So that's why you've had to do the little chapter on graphics and look at some of the stuff about like how to make charts and stuff like that. And I've got some links on the Blackboard site in the task 10.3 submission box about how to make charts from Google and also from Microsoft Word. And you know, whatever program you use, whatever you feel most comfortable with. Some people make it in Excel and then import it into a Word doc. That's the way that I was taught. But now you can really just do it a lot of different ways. Whatever you feel most comfortable with, you're going to make some charts based off of that data. And I don't really say what type of charts. I don't really say what type of graphics. In fact, I believe the exact wording I use is as few or as many as necessary for understanding. So I encourage you not to try and, you know, clump that all together into one chart, because that'll probably be a little overwhelming. You might need to kind of like break it up a little bit more. But the appropriate chart can be extremely illuminating. You know, it just kind of shows things off in a different way. And last time we did a project like this where I had you do kind of like one version on Wednesday and then the next version on Sunday, it didn't go perfect for everybody. Some people were doing both of them the same night. Some people didn't turn in one of the versions and lost a lot of points for that. So just a general warning or caution not to do that, right? You want to get every point that you can. Each one's worth roughly the same amount of points, actually. I think, obviously, Data Memo 2, because it requires a little bit more, you know, with the graphic making and stuff like that. It's worth a little bit more, but both of them are important. And obviously, if you do a good job with Data Memo 1, if you put it all in there, you're really just adding a couple of things for Data Memo 2 in a couple of days to augment it, to enhance it, make it more visual. And there are a couple other little tips that might go along with that. You might not need to put section headers in for Data Memo 1 because it might be really, you know, short, and that's with memos, you know, if they're like less than half a page, you don't necessarily need a section header. But with the graphics and stuff that you put into Data Memo 2, might make it a little bit longer, and it might be a good idea to put some section, you know, headers, dividers, whatever you want to call them, in there to just to make it a little bit more readable and organized with those things. So little things to think about as far as that goes, but this should be a pretty simple one as we kind of dip our toe into the research slowly but surely. And then next week we'll actually get into the kind of like bigger research project, but it'll be using some of the stuff that we talked about this week and some of the stuff that we talked about on last week, some of the basics about the research process, and then the culminating project will have an element of, you know, like charts and tables and things like that in it. You'll have to have at least one in the final research-based report, but we're not there yet. We'll get to it next week. So in the meantime, if you have any questions, of course, email me, mnorman@vinu.edu, and just reach out if there's anything I can do to help you. Take care, stay healthy and safe and as positive as possible, and I'll talk to you guys in week 11.